the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and today very pleased to have Paul Woodfield joining me in the studio. How are you, Paul?
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul. Excellent. I'm good. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming in. Your first time on the show.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you can fill listeners in on where you fit into this big wide world of tech, innovation, and business in New Zealand.
Well, good. It's a very good question. I actually have a past life as a quantity surveyor in the construction industry. So being involved on building projects, you see a lot of technology via the kind of materials that are used or the gadgets that they're using on building sites. But also that got me kind of thinking about where I would, look at going forward as far as where I ended up with my career. But I also have a heritage in the wine industry, and they were really responsible for bringing in a lot of the technology that we're using today to speed up processes, because their competition at the time was Montana, which was the largest firm alongside their firm. And they need to...
This is the family wine business.
This is the family wine business, the Corbin family. So they brought a lot of technology into the country, not just physical technology, but also knowledge. And that was utilised in a way that helped speed up processes and, gave them an entrepreneurial edge over the competition at the time. From there, I've done a master's and a PhD since. But in the postdoc period, we looked at innovation in traditional industries. Now, traditional industries tend to be, low to medium tech type businesses, but they often have a lot of high tech in them. If you think about milking machines, robotic milking machines and so on, or drones used on farms and so on. So there is high tech in those spaces as well. And that was something that we were looking at alongside what is it in these low tech industries that makes them tick. So technology was in there as much as it was the innovation, which is an emphasis around the type of research that I do.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, well, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. Now, lots to delve into today. We want to talk about the public safety network here in New Zealand. There's been an announcement in the last few days on that, Twitter, and some of the I guess the most important sort of aspects around what's going on there at the moment, Amazon robots, and I guess some of the broader implications, because we're hearing about these things all the time. There's wing drones in Australia. There's some further news on in that area from what we've discussed very recently. Some things going on at Tesla is quite interesting. And FTX and their challenges as well, amongst other things. So let's get straight in. I had the press release come through from Vodafone and Spark around how they're working together to deliver this new emergency communication system, effectively priority cellular services for our emergency services in New Zealand. So, we're talking of Fire and Emergency New Zealand, New Zealand Police, St. John and Wellington Free Ambulance. So, the services that we're used to kind of calling 111 to get hold of, they need to have great communications. And we know this has been an area where work's been, going on, to a degree sort of behind the scenes. So there's been a bit of detail, come through on that. And so what's going to come from Spark and Vodafone working together, of course, benefits from leveraging their existing networks and then extra investment going in. And then that's also going to be complemented by the new Digital Land mobile radio network, which is another aspect of the public safety network, and that's being delivered by Cordia in conjunction with Tate Communications. Another big success story, globally for New Zealand. So we've read a $1.4 billion dollar investment here. That's over a 10-year period, so that's I guess to get things established as well as operating. So I think it's encouraging that we're as a country continuing to invest. This is a really big investment. But when we look at where we are, say from a broadband perspective, with around 87% of the population reached by fiber, and in fact, this week we've even seen media release through from Chorus. I'm not sure who's picked that one up, or whether it's had much attention through in sort of mainstream media. But they've been sort of nudging and saying, "Hey, government should get in and maybe fund for them to hit rural New Zealand as well." But all of these elements provide us in New Zealand with a very, very strong overall communication services, which then has a flow on to the success of the nation. In some areas, this public safety network obviously has a flow on from a health and safety and addressing those emergency scenarios. And of course, the government has been their black spot sort of fund to get mobile coverage out into areas where there's been large chunks of black spots. But it seems very, very encouraging to me how these things are falling into place.
It is, and in a world where we seem like there's a disaster around the corner all the time, I think of all the holiday spots, and because the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that was the civil defence. All these networks are tied into civil defence and various other things. Imagine even Department of Conservation would be linked in there because they're remote. But all of our holiday spots being remote and needing these services, absolutely. So it's encouraging that they're spending so much money over a decent period as well, by the way, rather than just a 2-year project and see where it goes kind of thing. So
and I saw through from Chorus a number I found quite interesting. So this came through yesterday. Their statement was that they've invested in this in a study, and the result of that was that there's apparently $16.5 billion in economic benefits of high capacity rural broadband.
Right.
So if that's the case, to deliver out to the fringes, I guess we've got that 13% of New Zealand that doesn't have fiber broadband available. If you sort of step back and have a bit of a think about, well, what are the economic benefits to us of the existing broadband initiatives, if they think that's the case. So the report is called Rural Connectivity Economic Benefits of Closing the Rural Digital Divide. I haven't sort of seen the or had a chance to kind of read the full report there, but it is available on online for for those that are interested, from the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research.
Okay.
So that is online from Chorus's website, and if I've got the numbers right, their comment was basically that those in the rural locations that don't have fiber connectivity today would get around a $6,000 economic benefit per annum,
right,
by having access to the very best of uncapped broadband. Now, I'm like, when you stack it up like that, it's probably the first time I've seen any sort of figures that could sort of stack up to the cost of actually delivering broadband to once we sort of start to get beyond the reach that we have today, which hits those in towns and cities down to a pretty small scale already, right? So it's quite fascinating. I guess with Chorus, this is what they deliver is the physical, fiber infrastructure, and it's not just them. We've got the other providers, but from their perspective, that's where their business is. So it makes sense for them to get that research done to make the case. But I'm kind of fascinated to see how it plays out.
Yeah. That's a lot of money. You've talked about two lots of 10 billion plus amounts, but you think about the foundation that's beyond that as well. I mean, the broadband didn't come around overnight, kind of thing. The amount of research that would have gone prior to even rolling out this kind of stuff in the billions as well would have been the unseen billions that we don't see in the media, the stuff that happens in universities and research institutes and all the rest of it. So, it's encouraging to see that the technology's at that point where it's been rolled out extensively and fast.
We do now have like the best connectivity that we've ever had out to rural locations. Particularly with Starlink coming on stream, maybe there'll be other competitors, but there do seem to be still challenges for people, and whether exactly what the what the solution is. You've got Chorus putting up their hand saying, we've got the solution. It should be fiber. Starlink, interestingly, I've talked about Elon Musk companies that not advertising, but I do notice that Starlink are, spending a bit of money to advertise. Now they've got that coverage,
right?
So different options, and then of course we've got 4G, 5G, and Wi-Fi. So we're in the best position we've ever been at from a broadband perspective, but it's going to have to evolve forward. It's unlikely that these things will sit still, put it that way.
I've always found it intriguing that we're in a country of 5 million, nearly coming up to 6 million, I'm sure at some point, that we even have the ability to get to the rural areas, because we are a large country for our population, and when we're putting in money into infrastructure around roading and rail and so on, to prioritise connectivities is an important thing, I'd imagine. So, well, I don't imagine it is what it is. So
it gives us a significant advantage over our neighbours in Australia who have really struggled.
Absolutely.
Now onto Twitter. This is, I thought, 1 or 2 weeks we'll be talking about Twitter, and then it's going to die down for a little bit, and we'll come back to Twitter in a few months. But this week has been a pretty big one as far as Twitter is concerned. We saw Twitter Blue turned on, where for $8 folks can pay to get an account verified. And of course, in the past, that verification tick has been the indicator to users of Twitter that this is an official account, from a well-known organization or entity, or, individual who maybe there needs to be some clarity that this is that person and not an imposter. Now, Twitter always had this very, very strange mechanism that once you had the blue tick, you could change your name at any time, which seemed to me how does this make sense? You could change your name to, the president of the United States, whoever you wanted. And, for comedic purposes, we saw a lot of people changing their names to Elon Musk.
Is that right? Yes, of course, yeah.
And then, some of those folks having their accounts sort of permanently banned, others who had sort of, comedically sort of messed with their names, and they'd paid for the Twitter Blue verification. They'd instantly got, or, very quickly got their tick, and then realized they couldn't actually change the sort of the fun element out of their, out of their name. So quite a shambles. And then there was this element that people have been talking about, whereby you could fake somebody's handle on Twitter. And this is what happened with Eli Lilly. Is that the correct pronunciation?
It sounds right. The
drug firm
drug firm, yeah.
In the US.
Insulin and so on, yeah.
Anyway, so they they've had their Twitter account as LilyPad. It's had the verification, and so you would assume, okay, that's good, and you trust that. But of course, with this new verification model, what we saw was somebody came along and set up a new account, Lily, capital Lilly. Well, you could use capitals and lowercase in a Twitter handle. So instead of an LL, you could have two capital I's, and it would look exactly the same, as well. Anyway, so somebody faked the account. They paid the $8 and then put a tweet out to the effect that they were making insulin free, which of course is a pretty important aspect of how the company generates revenue. And immediately, as one might expect, once it's it started getting picked up, and it did get picked up because it wasn't just from some random Twitter account. It was a Twitter account with a big blue tick next to it, which of course there's still that feeling that, oh, that's a legitimate company. The handle looked totally legitimate, even though it wasn't. And immediate impact on the share price. So this is the sort of stuff that folks were kind of warning about, of like this is going to be a problem. And under Elon Musk's leadership, Twitter went ahead anyway, and it just seems like they're moving at this crazy pace compared to how they were operating before, which will probably yield some good results. But if this is the impact, and you lose investors, potentially millions of dollars, and you create distrust in the platform, you do wonder whether Twitter's days are becoming numbered. And even Elon Musk has tweeted recently that potentially the business will go bankrupt as well. So possibly this is a pretty big own goal, and I would think there's room for Twitter to be fined here as well for this sort of action. Surely,
the couple of things that came to mind was that it's quick cash flow, right? $8, lots of people doing it all at once, and does he never get paid back at any point when there's this kind of thing coming up, right? And an apology comes out, but does anybody get the $8 back?
Well, I think the apology came out from the drug company. I haven't seen one from Twitter either.
There you go. So, but with the drug company, the implications aren't just on the insulin; it's on their quick pens at $530 US. It's not just the chemical, if you want to call it that. It's on the way it's facilitated as well. So it may be that this company they have the quick pens themselves, but what about where insulin is facilitated by some other company's product? So it may have a dip for them as well, as far as their shares, their share prices. Absolutely. So. No, I find it really intriguing, but I also find that you've got two things there. You said that you could change the Twitter handle quite easily just with letters and capitalization and so on, but you're buying that truth, if you want, of that or who that person is. And I often think of so one of the things in my background is as a researcher for science for technological innovation, and one of their spearheads or large projects that they're putting money into at the moment is around veracity, around what truth is, what the provenance of where things come from, whether it's, let's say, the wine industry. I like talking about the wine industry, but the idea that where the grapes came from and where the wine is being made and so on. And of course, in France,
it's safe to drink.
It's safe to drink.
So many aspects.
But also around the naming of it. In France, it's very much controlled. But how do you know who somebody is? Yeah, I think that's an issue that you can buy basically your identity in this case.
Yeah, and it just seems like a real shocker from Twitter's perspective, and I guess and initially, a fair bit of, well, look, Elon Musk has been very successful with his other businesses. Yes,
Mm,
he's not been in media before and doesn't really have the experience in advertising, but he'll probably figure it out. Um, it all comes down to how long it takes for him to figure it out,
mm,
and there's a fair bit of damage that's been done already. And yeah, I'm just very curious as
mm,
to whether he can right this ship. And yeah, of course he is a very polarizing
mm,
figure anyway, right? So
mm,
other things are coming out. Oh, he stopped with the free meals, which we're seeing all sorts of changes across
mm,
Silicon Valley and tech businesses at the moment due to the economic climate.
mm.
So it might not just be Twitter, but if he jumps in on doing a range of
Yeah.
things, he may break things from the inside as well as from the
Well,
outside.
I guess there's a side of me that thinks, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. He's tried on this $8, it kind of makes sense to have given it a go to be able to go, okay, well, we can pull back it. That's not going to work. We're going to have to think about this
How big's his
situation.
ego, though?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is
I
he
mean,
willing to say I stuffed it up and
yeah,
you know?
probably not going that far, but at least potentially kind of thinking of it in terms of having given something different a go that hasn't been done before, and then finding out afterwards maybe it's not the way to go. Absolutely, but that's how entrepreneurship works. It's how innovation occurs, right? So
Yeah, and look, there's a level here of that he is bringing Twitter back to being more of a startup. Things are
mm,
happening in a more agile, fast-paced way.
mm,
The question
mm,
is whether you can actually do that with a company like
yeah,
Twitter at this point in time. If
mm,
the flow on is that you cost people billions of dollars,
mm,
then no,
yes,
shut the thing down, right? If it's
mm,
causing more harm than good,
mm.
there's a point where
That's a good
you
point. Yeah,
make it very painful, and maybe the doors have to shut. Now
guess
onto other matters.
yeah,
Amazon robots have been in the media.
yeah.
These are new ones. Tell us what you've seen and what your take is on these latest robots, and I guess what are the implications from a
Mm,
perspective of the workforce and the people
yeah.
that are involved.
Well, I find it intriguing. I mean, this is an article that came out a few days ago, so it's relatively fresh, introducing this yellow robot called Sparrow. Um, but I guess it's the idea that it can pick up things of all different types of shapes, and it does take away from the employees being able to do what they do. But then the argument also is that they're worked overtime. That part of it is that they need to alleviate some of that pressure on workers anyway. So it's not necessarily getting rid of workers. And the argument would be that you're bringing in robots, you're also bringing in more employment to make those robots as well. And there's been cases in the past where you have to um, build a lot of these robots or the technology and employ a lot more. And it begs the question, what does our education system look like going forward as well? What new skills are we going to need if we're not working in I guess, what might be considered mundane jobs of picking up packages and moving them around? What might be our new skills that we need going forward? And do education institutions need to think about what that looks like and kind of move between the traditional faculties or different disciplines and work more transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, all those lovely those kind of words,
Yeah.
but the idea that things work in a different way going forward. So not just about the technology itself taking over, but what is it that the people need to do? And a number of years ago now, we brought somebody over from Germany. He was looking at Industry 4.0, among other things, looking at low tech industries or traditional industries as they may be framed. And he was advising the federal government over in Germany at the time around the social science side of things, because everybody else is an engineer or a technologist and so on. I think there was a patent attorney in there, but he was on the social science side. So what does it look like when technology takes over to some extent? And there can be a positive outlook on this. I think we need to keep balance on that, because I guess we don't know everything that we don't know at this point. But we do know that maybe the way we live means that we're not doing 80-hour weeks, and we're down to 30-hour weeks, and technology does a lot of the work for us. But it begs the question: if you're in a factory, if you haven't got all the workers on the factory floor, and you only need to have a couple of supervisors making sure things are running, where do those workers go? And I think there probably is an answer. I don't have all the answers, but I do consider the fact that you have to build things for other things to work, right? So
It's quite fascinating. The sort of the broader aspects, and as you say, how that sort of plays in from an education perspective. And we look back a little bit, and it was certainly this idea that somebody would maybe enter an organization and spend their entire life within that organization, and sometimes maybe even doing exactly the same role. And what we're seeing here is this increase of change and change of pace, and this need for more of the sort of continuous education or lifelong learning, because robot comes in, it takes away this role, but of course we're seeing all sorts of new things pop up, whether that's, I don't know, driving Ubers, or there are the new things coming through, and there will be a mix of opportunities that will we would certainly hope will really suit everybody, so that as one thing change, as one part of the economy and the workforce changes and evolves, that new things spring up. And that's certainly I think what we've seen when we go back over the last sort of 150 years. We've seen more factories and automation come through in varying ways. So I always kind of like to look to the in the positive direction, that we shouldn't be all doom and gloom as we as we see these technologies coming through, whether it's robotics or otherwise. And in fact, we had news of these wing drones, which it's an entity that sits under Alphabet, previously Google, that they're now coming into Australia to be used for DoorDash orders. Now, DoorDash also launched in New Zealand. I don't think I've actually tried them here in New Zealand, so I don't know how. I must have a look. I tried them, in the US some years ago, but they haven't had that much attention locally. So must have a look whether that actually is effective, because if you don't have enough resource in terms of drivers and so on, that's not going to play out too well. But DoorDash is sort of like an Uber Eats type service. I know initially they were offering a range of deliveries. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We heard, I think, the last couple of weeks around Coles in Australia using this wing delivery. So DoorDash coming in there as well, just mixes it up. But again, this is a shift in kind of roles, right? If the cost of delivery comes down because you're using a drone to do the delivery, yes, you might need somebody else who's going to run around the store and pick the goods for you and package them up. And in fact, there might not have even been a delivery job there in the past, because it's been quite a small number of us that have probably, percentage-wise, across the population that have needed to have or utilize sort of grocery delivery. And sure, that sort of grew during COVID and so on. But even now, I've noticed at the local supermarkets, the number of lockers that they've got for pickup orders doesn't seem to have, been increasing over the last, 6 to 12 months. They've got, what they've had, and it seems to be working. But a change like this, will probably actually create some new opportunities, right?
Well, going back to the we were talking about broadband before in the rural areas. I mean, they're testing this in the suburbs by the sounds of it. But, the idea that you get to a point where the drones have such a range and can carry such a payload that you can get it out to the rural areas as well, getting out to those very distant areas, that would come into it. But also that I think this conversation would come up time and time again with anything with technology. Regulation will catch up at some point. There'll be some no-fly zones, or there'll be certain routes that these drones can take, and so on. I mean, that's yet to be reckoned, I would say.
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
we do have some of that in place already. Where in fact, it's more down the direction that you can't have autonomous drones without a regulatory sort of sign off. So you can't just take a drone and fly it across the city and, or across people's private properties and so on. So, there's going to be a sort of push backwards and forwards to make these things work. What I guess when I look and see these things are happening in Australia and not happening in New Zealand, even though we, going back, quite a few years when we saw that first sort of media coverage, I guess it was a, public relations sort of stunt in a way, with Domino's pizza delivery, and there was Simon Bridges and whatnot sort of receiving this drone delivered pizza. We had that demo, yet that's really as far as it's got in New Zealand, but Australia is going ahead with these much larger scale trials, and that concerns me because it looks as though maybe, and I, could be wrong without drilling into all the details, but it looks as though Australia, whether at a federal or nationwide level or at a state level, maybe making themselves an easier place to do these things than New Zealand.
Right.
And so that has some, some flow on in terms of employment and where the innovation's happening and so on. So we've got to be careful as a country that we keep iterating at pace, and we keep looking at how do we facilitate to bring those sort of cutting edge firms, whether it's autonomous flight, cars, all sorts of things, that we create that environment where aerospace, where New Zealand is the place to be. And it has been to a degree in the past, but I have some concern as to whether New Zealand actually is in the sweet spot right now, or whether Australia is actually eating, and other countries are eating our lunch, as it were.
Well, a thought that comes to mind is that sometimes it's good that somebody leads the way, because you can always learn off their mistakes, right? I mean, we can still be early adopters without having to be the first to move on these things, and learn from the regulations that need to be put in place, or just the systems that need to be put in place for this kind of thing to happen. New Zealand can probably benefit from that and actually expedite some of the issues that they could potentially have without having to worry about those issues. I mean, there are some positives, from that side too.
Yeah, there's always two sides to the coin. But certainly, we don't want to miss out on those, those opportunities.
We don't want to be too far behind.
New Zealand
that's what you're saying.
to be generating revenue by doing the valuable R&D work. That's at the front. When we're at the back, we just become users rather than the innovators that are actually, potentially generating that the revenue from inventing the technology, or being an early part of that cycle, because there's often a lot of money that gets poured in, and we're seeing it with autonomous vehicles that many billions of dollars sort of poured into that R&D. And so for me, looking at New Zealand's success, well, hey, how do we take a cut of that R&D piece?
I see where you're coming from with that.
Obviously there's the back end. We take advantage of the technology once it's ready, but we I would quite like to see us
Well,
at that
and
front
I
end
can
as well.
give it at least
Yeah.
a small answer on that. Where
Mm.
you think of, we're talking about drones here, right? And you're not really pushing the boundaries of drones just by getting them to go between houses and factories and whatever it might be.
Yeah,
But if you're pushing the boundaries on technology around zones to be able to go into hectares and hectares of forest and go through foliage and so on, or potentially go underwater. I mean, there are examples, and there's projects underway at the moment where they're looking at drones underwater to observe things like mussels and aquaculture and so on. So are we pushing the boundaries in different ways where we're first to the plate with that side of things rather than just the traditional let's get from point A to B type of technology?
No,
right?
that's good. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it's good to have that going on for sure.
Mm.
Now, do you want to do Zoom calls, video calls from your car, Paul? So what we've heard from Zoom and Tesla is that they're collaborating, and Zoom will be added to Tesla vehicles in the not too distant future. And for those that don't know, sort of current Tesla vehicle has a little camera in it sitting sort of just below the rear view mirror, and that has been started to be used from a perspective of safety. So are your eyes on the road and so on, and it's not certainly not unique to Tesla to have that hardware in there. Probably what is maybe a little bit more unique is that Tesla tend to control all of the technology in the vehicle, and so it's not that that's just one piece that's disconnected from the rest of the system, but then they can do different things with it. So
sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. They were actually looking at charging a fee for using it within Tesla on top of what you might normally pay for Zoom. Is that correct?
I hadn't actually seen that.
Look, I could be completely wrong there.
That bit in the write up, that the possibly what you're referring to as the premium connectivity.
Okay, maybe that's it. Yeah.
That you generally need in a Tesla if you want to use the built-in SIM card for doing your own sort of fun stuff, as it were.
Right.
There's a level of which every Tesla, whether you're paying for premium connectivity or not, has some data that moves backwards and forwards. So if you put a destination into the maps, it'll map it, get you to the destination, and it'll point you which is the quickest path.
Right.
But if you're paying for the premium connectivity, then you get some extras in terms of different routes, and you can see where the roads are busier or not, and so on. So I think this falls in that category where you'd be able to use that premium connectivity or you use Wi-Fi. So I'm not sure we know yet exactly how that will sit based on what's been announced so far. So I don't think they made that clear. For instance, if I use the Tesla app at the moment and I go into the Tesla app, one of the new features, and they are regularly coming up with new capabilities.
Right.
I can go under where is it? Security in the Tesla app, and then under Sentry mode, which is turned on, which means the cameras in the car are looking out for anyone getting too close to the vehicle. And if that's turned on, they can record it. I can then hit a button and get a live view from in any direction from the car. So maybe I get an alert, to say something's going on with the vehicle. So I've just fired that up now. I can see. I can see. And in this case, I can see out of the front camera, and I can change that around to a side camera view, and it will update that footage. So I'm looking, I'm looking live at what's happening from the vehicle. So that's something they do through the premium connectivity, but they also limit you. So I've heard maybe it's something like 5 or 10 minutes worth of sort of footage a day. So people aren't just constantly streaming, and Tesla's having to pick up the bill for that.
And
stuff.
You're right. It was the connectivity. Yeah. I see where you're coming from with that.
So yeah, but quite fascinating. that's happened.
Yep,
It was,
yep,
was
absolutely.
something I think a few people were curious about. Maybe, when we were stuck, not able to get into offices and so on, and people were making their car maybe an alternate office during COVID times and so on. And of
Yeah.
course, many of us do bits and pieces of work from our vehicles. So that does sound fascinating. Just another quick aspect I wanted to touch on as far as Tesla's concerned. I'm now looking at, the Tesla Model 3, it's been in the New Zealand market now for about 3 years. My vehicle's about 3 years old. Is it time to sort of roll it over for a new one?
Right.
And with Tesla, you've had this software element that some people have chosen to pay for, the FSD piece, which itself stands for full self-driving. Now,
Right.
3 years in, there is no full self-driving of this vehicle, despite varying promises, made and varying, videos and content by Elon Musk and Tesla. In fact, on the New Zealand website in 2019, it said that they would have what they called driving on city streets by end of the year. Now, that hasn't arrived in New Zealand. So I don't want to delve sort of too much into it, but there's an aspect there where it doesn't get a lot of media coverage, but from what I'm picking is there are some people who have laid down their money and are then maybe they've decided, look, I haven't got what I've wanted, so they're selling their vehicle, but feeling pretty bitter and disappointed that Tesla hasn't delivered what they've wanted. Maybe people in a situation like mine with, maybe I should upgrade to the new one, and there's no route to actually bring that FSD sort of subscription from one vehicle to another.
Right. So
so it's like, well, do I have to spend another? And it's, I don't know, over $11,000 now to buy that. The prices sort of keep going up. In the US, it's equivalent, if you add on a GST component, it's the equivalent of 28,000 New Zealand dollars to buy that FSD component. And this is part of what Musk talked about it, becoming very, very valuable over time.
Yeah.
But it does create some interesting challenges, and I think for those who and I'm told that people have gone to Tesla and and in some cases probably been given something back. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I would imagine under New Zealand legislation, you'd probably have a pretty reasonable chance if you put in the effort that they would be under quite some compulsion to potentially to have to do something there. But I imagine generally that's done a little bit sort of on the hush hush. So you're probably not likely to actually catch too much in the media, because you imagine, I don't know how many of these things have sold, but let's say they'd sold just 500 of them in New Zealand, roughly $10,000, a throw. That's $5 million. So
correct me if I'm wrong. I find this intriguing. So I don't have a Tesla, so I can't speak to that side of it. But you're basically saying you're paying for the $10,000 capability of something to happen without the actual enabling of it to happen.
Yeah, there are some elements on the software that you get that others that aren't paying,
okay, so you
don't have
get
access
some
to.
kind of
So
usability
you've got,
of it, but
it's not like you've got nothing. But
not the full
my
extent.
interest in Tesla, yes, there are some very interesting aspects about the vehicle from a technology and an electric perspective, an environmental perspective, and so on. But the number one interest is in what they're doing from an autonomy perspective for me personally. So if we look at the last 3 years, well, it's been all good fun and everything, but actually when I look back at what were the things that pushed me across the line, they haven't actually delivered it.
So I wonder if, I often think of, let's say you've got your phone that has all this capability. You never use all the capability on your phone. You've got certain apps that you gravitate towards. But maybe that's the argument. obviously have sold it on certain features, and it has enough features to keep you happy-ish, maybe that's part of it. But I think, yeah, and you're right. Maybe there's some kind of something to do with the consumer side that needs to be done around the guarantees of these things working, and at least given a timeline for it to work. But
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting, because we buy a lot of gadgets. Let's face it, we buy TVs and all sorts of things that have all sorts of capabilities advertised with it. Do we use it? Not often. Some of us might, but many people won't.
But you don't usually pay an extra 50% on it, or whatever it is, even 10% on top of your and especially a car. I mean, this is pretty unique to Tesla. And of course, they've kept this thing going of these price increases, even though we haven't necessarily seen all of them come through to New Zealand,
right?
So that you've got a little bit of FOMO, this sort of fear of missing out, because if the price goes up, and if we were paying what it was in the US, there would probably be next to nobody paying for the FSD capabilities at this point in time, if it was that $28,000 figure. And it does seem to be less and less people taking an interest, because Tesla hasn't delivered at this point in time. I guess from my perspective, I do want to see where where it goes, and so I'd be at quite a disadvantage if I were to replace the vehicle without also getting that capability. Now, depending on how these things play out, I may not talk further about this, as I'm sure probably others that have maybe gone, if they've chosen to go through any sort of process with Tesla, may not be able to either, if they come to a quiet arrangement. But I just thought I'd throw it out there, and we'll see what happens. I may or may not be a happy Tesla customer in a year or two's time, or I may have moved on to alternative products. We will see, and you can draw your conclusions from that. Couple of other things we did want to touch on before we sort of finish up. We do seem to just be having continuing impact in terms of tech startups sort of being hit in terms, or not just startups, the major media reporting of big layoffs at Meta. So there's a lot of unknown in the economy, but really the big remaining story I wanted to talk about is FTX, and they've gone into Chapter 11 in the US, which we know is bankruptcy. We're told over $1 billion in investor assets are missing. It's sort of mind blowing to me, the sort of size and scale of some of the issues that we're seeing associated with I guess these sort of in theory quite cutting edge firms dealing with what we're told is very much the the future of currency and other varying things that sort of sit on the blockchain. Yet we're able to have we're seeing these firms that are losing funds, getting hacked, big dramas, and I don't know, it doesn't feel like a great future when it looks like that. So I'm wondering how these things are going to be addressed. Is it a legislation thing that can resolve these? Because when we look at normal banks, we're pretty relaxed, right? We don't have that feeling like, oh, our funds are going to be lost. And of course, when you do drill into these exchanges that go down, I mean, probably most people have been told if you're buying crypto through an exchange, you should store it on a cold wallet. You don't leave it in exchange where if something happens, you're out of pocket. Yet this is exactly what we've
It's
seen
a
happen.
touchy subject, though, isn't it?
Whether it's
Regulating.
New Zealand
Yeah.
here with Cryptopia, or there's been
Mm.
varying ones over the years,
Mm.
and it's got to be addressed if there's going to be sort of any level of stability or long term confidence in this
You're
type of
touching
technology, right?
you're touching upon one of the important things. Is it's not necessarily that it's a bad product per se. It's the perception that it's not controlled in any kind of way. Maybe it is. That's not so much the issue, but perception is kind of king here, isn't it? That you get media articles like what we've been looking at that are really smearing what it is around cryptocurrency. Is it for the everyday person to get involved with? Most people would say, well, we're not sure, because we've seen these articles, and we've seen a lot of that over the last few years, where you do read into things a little bit more than potentially you need to. Maybe there's no issue there in the long term, but yeah, it's a question that I'm not going to answer because I think it's quite a touchy question. I'd imagine, especially around the regulation side of things. But we look at other products, and we can see, when we use drones as an example earlier, there are certain regulations for safety, right? And because they're seen, drones are seen, and you don't want them in the airspace, you don't want them getting in the way of the engines of planes and so on.
Yep.
So there are some reasons around that, but whether that's applicable in the long term for cryptocurrency in this case, yeah, it's something to be reckoned.
Yeah. Now there's an interesting little tie back to Twitter, because over the weekend what we saw was, and on the podcast before, we've spoken about Clubhouse, which was sort of the big social audio platform that came through during lockdown. Twitter, sort of caught up, as it were, with or replicated what Clubhouse were doing in their own flavor with Twitter Spaces. And Clubhouse has been going through its own sort of evolving and changes and challenges. But there was a bit of a moment there over the weekend. In fact, it was quite a long moment, and I'm not sure how long it ran for. But at one point, I think the space on Twitter, which is a live audio room that anyone could join in and listen in to, had been running for over 12 hours. I jumped in there at one stage. There was Kim.com sort of, being his larger than life sort of self, steering things and asking questions of someone that was sort of being labeled an insider of sorts at that time.
wow.
I think it was an individual who worked for a company that provided some level of cybersecurity services to FTX. So, absolutely fascinating. And we're at this time in history where you have that potential unprecedented access to people that are very close to these things, and all of the discussion and content that came out of that, and I think it was available for replay as well.
Right.
So for those that are really interesting, you're able to get some level of sort of insider stuff. But the level of, what is the truth and how should these things be spun? And, I was, reading some elements of this on Twitter. And so you've got, people that are involved in running these the space saying, spinning things from a particular angle. And then you've got other people coming in and, basically calling it dishonesty. So, there was a reference to, we've got these whistleblowers, and then other people coming in and saying, how can they be whistleblowers? It's after the fact now. The business has already collapsed. People have lost, some pretty large sums of money.
Yeah.
Why are you calling them a whistleblower? Aren't these people just now trying to, make themselves not look so bad and so on by coming
right,
out?
yeah.
If they're a whistleblower, maybe they could have stopped this thing happening. So, really, really fascinating, but a whole rabbit hole, there potentially. So, I think it's really interesting the way we see the media and Twitter and individuals, and in this particular case, sort of really cross over. And there's a degree to which it's highlighted the role that Twitter can play. And that comparison of, say, Clubhouse, which was a whole new social audio platform, versus Twitter, where those coming in, like Kim.com definitely got quite a big following on Clubhouse and was very much a regular there. But of course, he actually had a lot more followers on Twitter.
Right.
So Twitter's now sort of getting some of that benefit of this longevity as a platform, the followers that people have built up. And although I see people saying, hey, we're exiting Twitter and it's Mastodon is where we're going to be, and there are some communities that are springing up there, most of those people have got their existing followings on Twitter. And so I'm seeing that they're kind of, maybe one foot in each camp. So I think there's a whole lot more to go on that particular Twitter front. And I don't think that the full story is yet written on the regulation and what rules there need to be in place around the future of cryptocurrencies and blockchain that don't seem to be going away. I think that's probably the key
signal.
thing is there's some of these that are some of them that are failing, and we saw that with the FTX failing, but it's not as maybe some people are probably running for the hills.
Right.
At this point, we've seen cryptocurrency sort of definitely lose some value, especially over the last week, as we have done through the year. But there aren't the signs that people are just completely abandoning crypto. So I think it's that there's some gaps to be filled in. And it's not the end. That's my pick on it.
No,
but
I agree.
we'll see
creatures
what the reality is.
Kind of we've got to stick in there as long as we can to make sure this is going to get better for us as well. So so there's that side of it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's us for this week. I should mention for any of those that are watching the video, I've just had landed today the new HP Envy 360 2-in-1 laptop. It's a very slick device coming in about $3,000. Folds back on itself as the X360 devices do from HP. I'll be trying that out over the next little while and report back on it. But it first look looks very sharp. Now, a big thank you to our show partners, to Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, Gorilla Technology, and Deal. And we really appreciate their support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast and of the broader tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. Now, Paul, if anyone wants to look you up, where do they go?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the AUT website as well. Our profiles are all there.
Dr. Paul Woodfield?
Dr. Paul Woodfield, yeah. A bit of work goes into getting to that title, but we don't always use it. But it's it's one of those things. And there'd be some interesting, I hope, interesting things that I've been looking into, not only the innovation side of things and entrepreneurship, but also in the context of the likes of family businesses as well. So, have a look and see if there's anything of interest. Yeah,
well, I'm looking forward to having you on the New Zealand Business Podcast in the future and delving into some of the learnings from your research there. And for those that aren't aware, the New Zealand Business Podcast has really some incredible stories of many of New Zealand's top business leaders, and we're seeing more episodes come through there now, once or twice a month at the moment. So, well worth subscribing to if you're interested in the role of technology and innovation, in a more broader way, because that is part of the business podcast, or if you're interested in business in general. So, hey, thanks everyone for listening in. Thanks, Paul, for joining me. And
thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll look forward to the next one.
Excellent.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, Brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.